All right, welcome to the Sustainability Strategy Summit. Today's interview is with Matt Howard, VP of Water Stewardship at the Water Council and Director of Alliance for Water Stewardship North America. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah, you want to share a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned my role at the Water Council, and within that role at the Water Council, I really wear two hats. So you mentioned VP of Water Stewardship with the Water Council. So we are in the process right now of kind of building out our water stewardship platform. That's what we're calling it here at the Water Council, to be complementary to our innovation platform, which is more of what we've been known for over the past, 6 to 10 years, the Water Council focusing on water technology issues that help companies address their water quantity and quality problems. And so this complementary aspect of stewardship is one of the reasons why I was brought on board back in 2015 now. And we've focused the stewardship side of our work primarily on the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So you mentioned that, that's my other hat. We are the official regional partner for the Alliance for Water Stewardship in North America. AWS for short is headquartered in the UK. Their claim to fame is they have developed and are currently the standard owners of the world's only comprehensive water use standard. We just call it the AWS standard for short. The Water Council was involved in the development of that standard and was an early supporter of the Alliance. And so through that relationship, which actually goes back about 10 years, through that relationship, we've developed, again, this sort of formal partnership with AWS. And so myself and a person who works for me, Dylan Waldhuter, we cover AWS related issues from Canada down through Mexico on behalf of AWS. And so since 2015, most of our stewardship work at the Water Council has been focused on AWS. But in the past couple of years, I've been working with Dean Amhouse, our CEO, as well as our board, to develop some non-AWS, if you will, water stewardship programs for companies, focusing a little bit more on Wisconsin and the Great Lakes, but still with a bit of a regional or continental scope, if you will, in North America. And I can talk about some of that a little bit later. So really long answer to your short question, but like a lot of nonprofits, wearing a couple hats every day at work.
Yeah.
Really, focusing on helping businesses be better stewards of water resources and ultimately ensure that they're sustainably using water within their four walls or within their fence line.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about kind of why focus on water today. So we're definitely going to dive into that. Now, I'm going to start by asking you that question. I know you spent some time at the city of Milwaukee as their sustainability director, and your background's kind of sustainability. Why did you make the transition to water? Why is water so important?
Yeah, so I think subconsciously, since I started my career, I'm trying to find ways to converge what I do on my free time with my family and what I enjoy doing with what I do professionally. And I started making that transition away from, I'm an economist, by training, in those first kind of phase of my career, if you will, with the US federal government, kind of transitioning from economic analysis into sustainability related work. And then within sustainability, getting more involved in water and on a personal level, like a lot of people in Wisconsin and elsewhere, water is sort of central to what I do on my free time, whether it's, fishing or camping or hiking or, just being out in nature. And so this opportunity came along at the Water Council to help them build out this Alliance for Water Stewardship program. And it was just like the perfect opportunity to finally meet at that intersection of what I like to do in my free time and what I could potentially do with my career and my professional work.
I can absolutely relate to that. I grew up in a boating family, so spent summers on the lakes every year. So very important. And then of course we have this beautiful gem called Lake Michigan right outside
Yeah.
my window currently. So why is water important in the bigger scheme of things, and why should businesses be focusing or paying attention to water today?
Yeah, so I think, one of the obstacles, I guess, if you will, of our work in North America, um, is the fact that water is so readily available and so relatively inexpensive, to procure in North America, certainly in Canada and the United States, maybe less so in Mexico. And so we're always kind of fighting this, this headwind, that water is cheap and widely available. What businesses are starting to discover, and certainly kind of more of an awareness over the past couple of years, is clearly we can't take those water resources for granted in North America or in Wisconsin for that matter. And in order to maintain, sort of the security and sustainability of those water resources, which we just like expect, in North America, we've got to work at it. We made some initial investments, in this country, 50 to 100 years ago in terms of building up our original, water related infrastructure. And a lot of that infrastructure now is coming to the end of its useful life, so to speak. And so we need to make both real investments in terms of the gray and green infrastructure, but we also need to make real investments in terms of our practices and processes that we have both in industrial spaces, but also in terms of agricultural supply chains. And so for us, when I started doing the AWS work for the Water Council, it was primarily focused in the food and beverage industry. And, that's obvious. It's water intensive. You need water if you want, food or beverages. And again, that was back in 2015 when I started. And so just even in the past 6 years, we're working with sectors now I never really thought I would be working with. One that really stands out to me is ICT, the information communication technology sector. We've done quite a bit of work here at the Water Council with Apple and Google over the past couple of years. And, it's not just that sector, it's consumer products, it's, it's extractives, petrochemical, you name it. There's just a growing awareness across the board that water resources are critically important to everything that we buy and make and grow. So you're just seeing more and more companies now really starting to double down on being better water stewards.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to mention what we eat.
Right.
That's always been one of my main entry points to water, just having a background in regenerative agriculture and just understanding that, what we put in the soil ends up in our water. And, so then we can and we consume that.
Right.
So
yeah,
another important industry for sure. And so what are the risks for businesses for not paying attention to water?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. It's the interesting thing about water stewardship is there's no single right answer, and it's a little bit of an art and a science. And so I find myself fielding questions like that a lot from businesses and consultants that are working with businesses. And my answer is, well, it depends. It depends on physically, where you're located, where your supply chains are located. It depends on how water intensive your operations are. And so to maybe help narrow down, an answer to your question, let's talk about Wisconsin and, Wisconsin businesses, be focusing on this issue. It's interesting to me right now, we live for the most part in a water abundant state. But yet in the southern half of our state and stretching all the way over into Michigan, across Lake Michigan, we're in a pretty extreme drought right now. And I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of that. I know it's starting to get a little bit more airtime, especially with farmers right now and impacts on corn and other crops. But you don't want to be caught surprised by a water related issue because when a severe water related issue sort of rears up, it's too late. And so, for instance, right now with this drought, you really got to stay on top of watching, trend lines, and whether it's just basic rainfall issues or, groundwater levels that you might be reliant upon to supplement rainwater. If you find yourself in a drought, it's really about having an issue and a risk radar for water that's proactive. Because again, when you're in the middle of a drought, it's probably too late to really implement across the board mitigation strategies. You're kind of just trying to survive when you're in the middle of a drought. California is a great example right now. They should have spent the past, few years after the last drought, better preparing and building more resilient infrastructure and supplies, for this current drought. It's too late now for them to sort of mitigate. And that's true with any sort of water issue or you look across the lake at Flint, Michigan, and the loss of municipal water service, that original pain point of as severe and harmful as it was to the citizens of Flint, one of the sort of the canaries in the coal mine, if you will, for that crisis was the General Motors production facility and the corrosive impact that municipal water was having on engine parts that they're manufacturing there. And that's sort of one of the first indications in the region that there's something wrong with the water supply. Mm-hmm. So by the time that happens and they lose municipal water service in that industrial facility, it's really kind of too late. Now you're willing to spend anything to make sure that you've got sustainable water resources coming in. And so there was a lot of decentralized water treatment and potable water being brought on site, to manufacturing and other critical businesses in that region as they sort of fought through that crisis. And so, my point is, yeah, a water crisis really gets people to pay attention to water issues, but for businesses, if you only pay attention when the crisis occurs, it's too late. So in the state, we just can't take for granted, that it snows a lot and it rains a lot and we're next to a couple of Great Lakes. We really need to have a better understanding, no matter which sector you're in, a better understanding of how you're using water in your direct operations and supply chain, and then the risks that could be associated with where you're physically located, the watershed in which you're located, and sort of based on those two factors, you can sketch out, a risk radar, an issue radar that can help you be a little bit more proactive for when those crises do occur. You'll hopefully be a little bit more resilient and more sustainable and can weather, those shocks better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. And I'm thinking, because of the drought, then the emergencies such as flash flooding and flooding becomes sort of more exasperated. Mm-hmm. Is that's true, right? Like, because I always think slow it, spread it, sink it, right? If you can't slow the water down, right, the faster it moves, the more damage it can cause.
But and kind of, I know we're supposed to be talking about Wisconsin, but going back to California, it's like the poster child of how not to manage water resources. The previous drought, which at that point in time was the worst drought, in the recorded history, was followed by like 2 years, or at least like a year and a half or 2 years of really intense rain and snowfall. And the impact of that was severe flooding in all the places that had just weathered that drought, and none of that water was able to be captured. It just all ran off ultimately out into the ocean, right? And so it's like, it's a boom bust cycle. And so that's what we're going to start seeing more and more, both here in Wisconsin with increasing rain events, just in terms of the amount of precipitation and moisture, if you will, that's in the atmosphere, in the spring. So we need to do a better job as well of, again, just developing a more resilient approach to these boom bust cycles of drought, intense rainstorms. We're not immune from that just because we are in the upper Midwest or in the Great Lakes. We're still going to have to deal with some of those issues. And you mentioned regenerative agriculture. Clearly, soil health, regenerative agriculture, all those things have an impact on water quality. And again, that drought cycle, followed by, intense rainfall, if you're not, following best practices in terms of, no-till and things of that nature, that's exactly what you're going to see, localized flooding, all the nutrients running off, your field, getting into local waterways, causing water quality problems downstream. So Yeah, for sure. It's just, you've got to get, and it's really hard again in the Great Lakes, again, because we have access to 20% of the world's freshwater reserves. It's really difficult to get people to focus on quote unquote water stewardship, the full range of quality, quantity, regulatory, reputational issues, because we just see so much water all the time, frozen and otherwise, that we just expect it to be there when we need it.
Right. Yeah, I don't think a lot of businesses always understand that ripple effect, right? And so what are you seeing Wisconsin businesses do in terms of, water stewardship practices or just taking care and thinking about water sustainably across the state?
Yeah, so it's a bit of it, back to the issue of water stewardship, being a sort of a it depends, kind of a approach. In southeastern Wisconsin, certainly around here, the more industrial, the facility, the issue that seems to dominate is around stormwater, mitigation and management on site. For instance, in the city of Milwaukee, we've got a stormwater fee on the amount of impervious surface area. Stormwater runoff is, the major contributor to pollution or pollutants in our waterways here in southeastern Wisconsin. And then also, focusing on optimizing, water use within an industrial facility. So ensuring that, you're efficient with how you're using, that water resource, but also ensuring that clearly you're compliant with any water related regulations that you have to follow. But also taking a bit of a proactive and innovative approach to how you use and could potentially reuse water, like in that industrial facility. So there's kind of an industrial approach, and then, an agricultural supply chains, whether it's, commodity production or dairies or whatever. Of course, the issue is a little bit different, depending on where you are and whether or not you're relying on rainwater or irrigation and, groundwater issues. But on the ag side of the equation, where we probably spend most of our work at the Water Council, also with our AWS work as well, is in dairies, in the dairy sector. And obviously we know all about the issues of manure management and polluted agricultural runoff. And so, dairies really are an area that, we need to focus on in terms of policymakers and professionals and sustainability. And, farmers want to do the right things, folks at dairies want to do the right things. And so it's just a matter of trying to build bridges and working, in that setting to really, quite frankly, help those dairies survive, thrive, and work, collectively with stakeholders in their community to address shared water challenges and opportunities. We did an engagement with the River Alliance of Wisconsin and collectively worked with them in a farm in Marathon County called Miltram Farms and large dairy, and helped them kind of go through this Alliance for Water Stewardship standard. Interestingly enough, it was the first farm in North America to actually get certified to that standard. Industrial sites have kind of been doing this left and right, but sort of been a difficult proposition just because of time, resources, competing interests, right? And it's like, here, now I want you to implement this standard. But we were able to sort of bring down those barriers to entry in partnership with the River Alliance. And it's just amazing kind of what has happened as a result of that, of Miltram telling their story, actually having other dairies in the region come to the farm, the dairy, to see, what's going on, show us how you're reusing water, show us what you're doing in terms of no-till for silage and things of that nature. But also customers coming to the farm, cheese processors and others. In fact, when we did the kickoff kind of announcement for the certification for this dairy probably a couple of years ago now, General Mills showed up, some people from General Mills headquarters. So it's a really great way, number one, to obviously secure and help achieve greater sustainability with a resource that your business is reliant upon, you know, when we're talking about dairies. But it's a service to the community, right? Because, you know, the surrounding farms, surrounding residents, you're all reliant on that same resource. You know, it's a shared resource. And so being proactive through water stewardship really helps, whether it's a farm, a dairy, or a data center. You know, it helps a business you know, sort of achieve that social license to operate and grow and to protect that. And so that's what we're seeing from businesses that are really embracing water stewardship. There's this internal, inside the four walls, inside the fence line optimization, you know, really sort of business bottom line driven, being efficient, complying with regulations, sort of a deal. But once you really start focusing your actions outside your fence line, because that's really where water related risk lives, and doing that collectively with others, it gets at brand enhancement and brand value. And so, you know, the companies and the organizations, whether they're in Wisconsin or North America or globally, that have really truly embraced water stewardship, seeing definitely some enhancement to brand value and building brand equity with consumers and customers.
I really love this example you shared because I see it in so many other places in sustainability, right? So you're speaking to it in water, but also these effects can happen when you're collaborating across stakeholder groups in other areas of sustainability. And so, you know, just working at engaging the community or engaging your stakeholder group just by, you know, doing something good for your business and then sharing that story. There's so much people can learn from that.
Right. Well, and the other issue too is, you know, this happens a lot, whether it's agriculture or industrial facilities. But if there is a time of water crisis, and whether it's a drought or, you know, a contamination issue or whatever the case may be, people tend to focus on that highly visible dairy or that highly visible manufacturing facility. And because they don't know what you're doing, they can have a misperception about how you're impacting water resources or how you're using water. And so again, water stewardship helps, you know, credible water stewardship that you're transparently communicating helps keep you ahead of some of those issues and mitigate against that misperception or someone just kind of developing some narrative in their head about what's going on at that farm down the road. And so that's been another real positive benefit that we've seen in Wisconsin from the sites that we've worked with on AWS, but also sites across North America.
Yeah. You know, I can speak from my own experience a bit on that. I believe, like, you know, one of the big bottling and soda companies have recently gotten certified to AWS. I don't want to misspeak, but, you know, my perception of some of them at different times has been not being very great stewards.
Yeah.
And just knowing that they're taking the initiative to go through the certification is, you know, it's not a perfect solution, but it tells me as a consumer that, okay, they're at least in the process of, you know, improving their system and taking better care of the resources in the community. So
yeah. No, and that's fair. You know, and we work with everybody in the food and beverage sector, from, you know, Nestle Waters to Coca-Cola to Pepsi to General Mills. So it could be any one of those companies or sites, and it's an education process for the company and for the team that are implementing the AWS standard, just in terms of basic understanding of how do you conform with the standard and what does it mean, you know, to be a good water steward. But there's also an education and outreach component that's critical with your key stakeholders, because you got to reach outside your comfort zone as a manufacturer or as a farmer. When it comes to water issues, you got to reach outside your comfort zone and outside those four walls and that fence line, and go out there and start credibly engaging with stakeholders and telling them what you're doing, but also getting their input, because those stakeholders have key intel about issues in the watershed, which could impact their operations, whether it's a changing regulatory environment or back to this kind of this perception issue about what the community feels about how they think you're impacting water resources. But again, you know, water stewardship, there is a little bit of discomfort there for some of these companies because they do have to go outside their four walls and they do have to engage key stakeholders. And what we are seeing, at least with the AWS standard, and I'll say North America, because obviously I can speak firsthand about the certified sites in North America, is those are top-notch quality sites. Now, that doesn't mean everything that that company does across its value chain is credible with regards to water stewardship, but the site itself, that's a third-party verified standard. You know, it's an independent auditing group that comes on site and does the certification to that standard. So it's not AWS, it's not the Water Council. Consumers, community members, stakeholders can be confident about those sites that are certified to the standard. It's a continuous improvement approach to water stewardship. They have to show improvement year over year, and they have to ensure that the actions at that site are aligned with conditions and risks in the watershed in which they operate.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So I'm curious if you have any advice for a sustainability professional out there that maybe water isn't on their business's agenda. You know, any tools, resources, or like I said, just advice for them to sort of elevate the water conversation in their company.
Yeah, and this is a new phenomenon for a lot of professionals in the sustainability field. You know, people have spent the past 10, 15 years, rightfully so, focusing on energy and waste reduction and things of that nature. And water is kind of the new frontier for the sustainability professionals. So I have lots of conversations with individuals like Fortune 500 companies that have done really amazing things on renewable energy, and they don't even know where to begin, you know, on water stewardship. So for that professional, it is helpful to start with a conversation with somebody and, you know, give me a call, you know, reach out to the Water Council, check out the Alliance for Water Stewardship. There's a lot of great free tools and resources out there on sort of assessing water related risk. World Resources Institute has a tool called Aqueduct. World Wildlife Fund has a tool called the Water Risk Filter. Those are all free, they're all online, and those are really, for the most part, straightforward places to start when you want to assess water-related risk associated with your operations. But, you know, a phone call and email, you know, to us here at the Water Council or the Alliance for Water Stewardship is also good. But WWF in particular puts out a lot of good sort of like white papers on water stewardship. And so, you know, that's also a kind of an easy place to start if you just want to do some background reading, you know, before you dive into a conversation. In terms of like your day job, you know, so what am I actually going to do now at my job now that water's on our radar screen? You know, the first thing you need to do is you need to identify how you're using and how you're impacting water resources within your operations and supply chain. And so, you know, that's some real digging that you're going to have to do internally with others to try and get a handle on that. You know, it goes back to the old adage that which gets measured gets improved. And so, you know, you first need to determine, you know, do we even know how much water we're using? Is it consumptive use? Is it once through cooling? You know, just how are we using water in our operations? And then sort of based on that, you know, kind of pull in this, what we call a watershed assessment. Okay, this is how I use water at the site. The site's located in this watershed and it's got these issues of risk associated with it, whether it's quantity or quality. And then you kind of marry those two factors together and you sort of magically spit out a risk assessment, you know, for your site. I'm being a little facetious, but it is art and science when it comes to water stewardship. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of work with engineers and facilities that are trying to assess water risk for their operations. And they're looking for a tool or a formula or something that's just going to tell them what to do. And it's like, that's not how water stewardship works. So understand how you're using water, understand where you're located and how your locations are impacted by those watersheds. And then based on that, now start thinking about, well, for our company, we've got, these 5 sites located across Wisconsin. Seems that we're not too water intensive, but we have very large facilities which have an impact on stormwater runoff. So as a company, continue to do the right things in terms of water conservation and doing, maybe a water audit to make sure you're not leaking water and things of that nature. But then start thinking about, we're really impacting water resources just through our physical plant and how we're located and how runoff is getting. And so maybe that's our highest priority risk. So you got to go through and then start doing some prioritization of risk. So anyway, all that is to say is, you got to look internally, you got to see how you're using and impacting water resources. And then based on that, are there other risks that are associated with where you're located? And then mash that all up together and then try and figure out, what are some next steps and actions I can do to mitigate risk for my operations.
Yeah, that's fairly pragmatic. I think that's a process sustainability professionals could, are fairly accustomed to. So nuts and bolts question, I just remember when I was working, as a sustainability manager, the measuring piece of the water sometimes was challenging. You get a meter reading, on some interval of time and it's delayed. And, do you have any tips or best practices that folks are using out there to get good, accurate data or measurements around their water consumption?
Well, I mean, now this is sort of like, the heart of what the Water Council has done, for the past 10 years in the innovation and tech side. Water meters are critically important. You would be surprised by how many manufacturing companies I talk to that don't either have functioning meters or reliable meters or even meters, let alone sub-metering, right, for different, processes and parts of the facility. So yeah, you gotta do some minimal amount of work and investment in developing accurate, reliable metering for how you're using water. So you got to start there, so you can at least have a basic measurement and understanding of what you're using. Beyond that, or I should say within sort of the metering technology, there's real time water quality and quantity monitoring. There's all kinds of ways to get more nuanced in terms of how you're monitoring and when you're monitoring water use, but start with some metering. Mm-hmm. And then again, based on what you're learning about the level of intensity of water use in the facility and the complexity of water use, then maybe start thinking about sub-metering. And if you've got real sensitive technologies, metallurgy and things like that, that require more constant or up-to-date metering, then think about, well, maybe some real-time metering, and think about things you can obviously access from a smartphone, et cetera. So just start with basic metering.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think, again, this is going to be an it depends question, I know, but still, like, is there a time frame that's general enough that you can give folks to track for a month, track for 6 months to establish a good baseline?
When it comes to water stewardship, I always say a business cycle. So whatever your business cycle is. So if you're a farm and it's the growing season, that's kind of your business cycle. So you got to go through a whole growing season to try and figure out what your water impacts and uses are, and again, depending on what type of products you're manufacturing or who your customers are, go through a business cycle, and really try and get a full understanding from that business cycle about how your use changes, or maybe it's steady over the course of the cycle. So whatever that business cycle is for you and for your company, I think that's the minimum, but a year sounds about right as a general rule.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you so much. So if someone wants to learn more, I know they can Google the Water Council and find
Sure.
you and AWS. I know we have a AWS training coming up in July.
Right.
So
Yes.
July 15th through 18th, you can get trained in the standard.
Correct.
And we have a webinar also on August 19th, the business case for water stewardship, where we're going to be hearing from Green Bay Packaging about their new mill and the
Yeah.
water practices that they put on. So you can find any of those events at Wisconsin Sustainability /upcoming events. Is there
Right.
anything Water Council related that you want to share?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing too is obviously to remember our partners at WMEP, who really, quite frankly, have helped the Water Council through their investment in time, build out AWS in North America, and through that partnership, WMEP has really become the preeminent, consultancy and organization within the U.S. and maybe even North America on water stewardship. And so you guys are doing work outside of Wisconsin now, on water stewardship. So there's proof in the pudding, right?
Yep.
We do have really great homegrown resources, and it's not just the Water Council or our work at AWS, it's WMEP and others as well. So just, make sure that people check out some of those homegrown resources. But in terms of the Water Council, water stewardship is going to be on our radar screen for the next 10 years. We're really going to start building out an array of programs related to water stewardship, not just focused on AWS. An emergent area for us that I've spent a lot of time over the past year and a half has been on ESG reporting, environmental social governance reporting. And the fact that right now water within ESG frameworks is really poorly accounted for. And a lot of the folks within the ESG world have taken, a carbon or GHG approach with trying to do the same for companies in water, and it doesn't work. And so we're actually piloting what we're calling a corporate water stewardship accelerator right now with about 16 companies across the US and Canada, focused on kind of that process I laid out. You asked me, where does a person start, in their company in terms of water stewardship. So we've kind of laid out an approach, 6-step approach to accelerating water stewardship at the corporate level, but then reporting that credibly in ESG frameworks. And we're working with an asset manager right now based out of Europe, as well as a ratings agency, global ratings agency, on sustainability. And so over the course of this year, as we pilot this approach with these 16 companies, if this really sort of pans out in terms of there's a value proposition for everyone that's involved, the company, the ESG folks, we're going to roll out, a new program from the Water Council on this corporate water stewardship accelerator, probably in early 2022. So kind of keep your eyes on that. There's, the standard is great. The AWS standard is just, I can't say enough good things about it in terms of what it does, but not every company is ready to jump in and use the standard. You have to have an understanding, again, of how you're using water across your sites. You need to prioritize sites for action, and then those high-risk sites, start with the high-risk sites, do the AWS standard. A lot of companies aren't there yet. They just simply don't know how they're using water. And so this accelerator really gets at that issue and sets them up for credible water stewardship action.
That's great. I hope that's successful. Absolutely. I've just enjoyed seeing the insurgence in the ESG world of people's awareness and more and more investors requesting reports and information. And that's a really good trend for us sustainability professionals to see.
Right. Yeah. And I know the professionals out there are just eager to do more reporting, but but hopefully things will start becoming more aligned in the ESG world around, I don't want to say a standardized approach, but at least more aligned around, a couple of key credible frameworks to use, and hopefully make their life a little bit easier so they can get away from reporting and get into doing the actual work of sustainability, in the facility and on the farm.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Matt. This has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, and the council as well, and all the great work that you guys do.
Great.